when I decided to do anything about talking about humour, you know, I thought, well, at least you've got to really know your subject. So I thought, well, righto, one way of getting to know, I'll look in the dictionary for the meaning of the word humour. The dictionary as follows: a mental disposition, a frame of mind or mood, the capacity of perceiving the ludicrous elements in life and art. Well, that's sense of humour. But you see, we come down not so much this highfalutin sort of humour, but plain, simple, down-to-earth Yorkshire humour. Now, we know that humour is a great leveller. It is the great leveller, and it unites all types of people. But to me, because I come across it daily, the more simple, elemental, and the more nearly approaching our own daily lives do we really appreciate it. Now, one thing, speech, this is called, and this is how we go about it in Yorkshire a bit, I think. If thou knows nought, say nought, and that nobody'll notice. And never say nought at all, unless there's something worth saying. There's brass it matter. Now save the breath to coil the porridge, and if there's any to spare, put it there, because they'll need up of that raised on the deathbed. Whereas, of course, as I said, there are many, many types of humour. And I think that some of the best humour we get is from children and the old. Because at that state of one's life, one is logical, uninhibited, and really afraid of nothing. Because, you know, we often say of children, isn't he or she a little comic? Well, you know, they aren't comics at all. They're the most logical part of their lives. It's just pure logic and initiative. Well, unbelievable. Because I was thinking about the story. The teacher was telling the children the story of the Nativity. And she was telling them how Joseph and Mary had to go to Bethlehem. And how to them, Bethlehem was a large and lonely city. And the little baby Jesus was due to be born. But it was always the same story. No room at the inn. Until they came to one inn. And the innkeeper said, well, I have no room in my inn, but you may sleep in my warm and comfortable stable. Now, children, she said, isn't that a very sad story? That the little baby who was born to be the saviour of the world should have to be born in a lowly, lonely stable. And all the little children were very sad. Little girls were in tears, except one little lad. He put his hand up and says, well, I blame Joseph, he's a boat. We get so many, many wonderful things from children. Because this little lad, you see, we're laking on sands with his granddad, laking at sand castles. And they done and done what little lad was first told. Oh, he says, let's give up now, Grandad, and you keep bucket, because my mother says I can have a bite when you do. So you see, children said just what they think, whether it pleases or grieves. And that reminds me of another story about some children at school. The children at school describe a day in my home, you see. So this little lad must have decided to describe Monday. So he said, on Monday, my mother gets up and looks out of the window. And if it is raining, she says to my father, oh, bugger the washing, and gets into bed again. And you know, kids, they'll have a go because it's initiative, isn't it? And this here teacher, she was telling kids a bit of a dissertation on buildings, how they'd walls and doors and roofs and ceilings and the like, you see. And she was telling them about windows. And how many sorts of the windows there were. There were sash windows, dormer windows, loafer windows, French windows. She noticed Johnny wasn't listening, so she had him now, you see. Now then, Johnny, she said, how many sorts of windows are there? He says, open, shut and broken. You know, talking about children, I think this is a good one. And I was talking to some young ones at Combe Valley a while ago. And so, of course, I always get a few nice stories they tell me about the children, you see. So now then, I said, I'm sure some of your young wives should have plenty of stories you could tell me. So this is what one of them told us. She didn't know she was giving herself away, you see. You know, we sing that little song now. Dance, dance, wherever you may be. I am the Lord of the dance, said he. She said, well, my little boy came home from school last week and he said, we learning a new song at school today, Mummy. She said, I said, have you, love, what was it called? He said, it was called I Am the Lord of the Damp Settee. Well, of course, if she had to tell him to get off it week before, he wouldn't have known that one of them, so it would have. So we'll move a little bit further, I think, now, into what I call not particularly subtle humour. Might be a bit heavy, but it just falls down in the right spots. Can I mention, incidentally, that this is summer wine country? You see, in the summer wine country, we're having quite a revival of things. People's coming to look at things. And they're finding, incidentally, what a beautiful place we live in. Now then, of course, we knew that before they came, but it's very gratifying to hear some people delighting in what you are. But they brought this here chap from America, showing this lovely little England. Well, they couldn't suit him. We know to London, Stratford, nowhere. So they brings him up to one of his better little farms up on Bales. Well, he brings him and he looks around and he's not a bit moved. He says, well, he says, you call this a field? Well, on my farm in America, I have a field and I can get on my horse at sunrise and I haven't reached the other end at sunset. Well, I never did set thought farmer where once had a horse like that, but we shot it. So, he took the old farmer back to America on a reciprocal visit, so to speak. Well, they couldn't satisfy him, we don't know that. Surely to goodness, America! So they thought, well, let's take him to Niagara Falls. So they took him to Niagara Falls, look, and he just stands there, looks at it as if it were a little stream. And guide's going on, oh, and first going on, well, anyway, guide looks at him. Well, he says, sir, and now what do you think of that? He said, over there comes 52 million gallons of water in it. Well, he said, what else can you expect in there putting out to stop it? I've been thinking, there is at present in this affluent society that we live in, we miss a little bit. And I refer to that virtue of good neighbourliness. You know, it is a bit in abeyance at the moment. And I think we should try and help each other as much as ever we can. And it's up to us lot just to keep it going. I mean, we get it on television every day. Neighbours, good neighbours. Well, I'm sure you'll agree with me. This next story epitomises that to perfection. Because with this chap, and he'd bought his car on hire purchase. Unfortunately, he fell behind with his payments. So in due course, he received a letter from the hire purchase company as follows. It says, Dear Sir, we regret to inform you that you have fallen behind with your hire purchase payments, and unless we have an immediate remission, we shall be obliged to fetch the car back. And what will the neighbours think? However, a few days later they received the reply as follows. Dear Sirs, I have discussed this matter with the neighbours and they think it will be a mucky trick. Sometimes, you know, you think you're doing really well. Everything's going splendid. Then you just run into some trouble. So this here chap, yes, sin, oh yes, sin. And if he didn't get his son into monetary difficulties, well, of course, totally worked a man. They were no better off than they were. So he couldn't get a bit of help and a note. So finally, in desperation, he thought, now then, there's not but one thing I can do. And that is to ask God to help me. Now, he knew that God lived a right long way up, but he didn't know just how high up it was, you see. And there's what he could think on. But Silas Sky up Greenfield Road, that's 200 feet or something like that, above sea level. I know that for myself. So anyway, he wrote a letter. Dear God, I have got myself into terrible financial difficulties. If you could just let me have £10, I could put myself straight. He wrote it and addressed it to God, the Isle of Skye, Holmfirth. It duly arrived at the post office, and the postmaster at that time, so the story goes, was a good Christian gentleman. He read the letter, then he called the staff together Now then, he said, this is a pure act of faith. Can we do something about it? Well, yes, we'll have a whip round. So they had a whip round, but they could only get £7. But they sent it, and in due course, back came the letter. Again, addressed to God, the Isle of Skye, Holmfirth. It was opened, and it read as follows. Dear God, I thank you very much for the money you sent me. It has helped me out of my difficulties. But if you send any more, do register it, for them greedy buggers at Holmfirth post office took £3 out. And whilst we're talking about officials, you know, up here in North, even them as gets elected at local councils, as right down to earth characters. I remember a story about one local council up here in North. They decided to refurbish the park. Now then, in the park, there was a little pond. Well, a fairish pond, really, and lovingly described by the populace as lake. So they get together to get this meeting, you see, decide what to do. So naturally, one of the youngest councillors, he says, well, I think if we better refurbish park, we ought to refurbish lake and all. He said, I think we ought to have a gondola. Well, to everyone's surprise, the father of the council, full agreement. Well, I said, we don't think we could do better. Oh, but he said, I think we ought to have two. And then if we had two, he says, we could breed off on them. There were another parish council, farther away up at North than we are, and they're getting some premises. They had no premises of their own. And suddenly, somebody gave them a room for the sen. But it had a right lot to do. It wanted floor covering, it wanted walls doing, it wanted windows doing, it wanted watering, it wanted lighting and everything. So, of course, they'd have a get-together like to see how to do it and go on a bit, you see. And again, as I say, young'uns as they tell this push you for the don't they? So when they discussed it at some length, you see, young'uns said, well, I think that if we ought to spend all this here brass, we ought to have a chandelier. But the chairman jumped up, he says, well, I don't. He said, in fact, I think there's 3 reasons why we shouldn't have a chandelier. He says, for one thing, I don't think anybody can spell it. I don't think anybody local can play one. And what we really want is more light. So much for public councils. Mind you, those that worked at council, some of them are just as bad. There was this old gent, and he was a worker at the local gents' lavatories. Well, not a very salubrious job, you will agree. But as we say, all labour is honest, etc., etc. There he was. And people used to come by, and one particular man, he made it in his way to get to see the old man, because they'd have a lovely time, and he could talk a bit of anything, could the old jot. And so one day when his friend came by, he said, you know, John, he said, you're here, he says, week in and week out, month in and month out, year in and year out, he says, why don't you write up Mass Council for a holiday? Well, lad, he says, I think I might think about it. Well, fair enough. A few weeks later, when gentleman comes by again, there's old John, sat outside lavatories, deck chair, Panama hat, sunglasses and reading paper. There, Johnny said, what the fuck are you doing here? I thought I told you to write up to council and ask them to for a holiday. Well, he says, I did, and he said, certainly. Take it at your own convenience, so I've had to do. I come now to tell you the first story that I ever told, and I was 11 years old. Because, you know, in school, when I went to school, well, of course, you just went to school for the 3 hours, didn't you? And of course now, children go to Switzerland, they go abroad, they go to theatres, they go to London. We had nothing and did nothing, except we had a forward-looking teacher, I admit now, Mrs. Allen Batty. And she had one little thing which she allowed us to do on a Friday afternoon after 3:30, and sometimes 3:45. You wasted very little time from the 3 hours. However, you could do a little something. You could do a little dance, sing a little song, read a little poem. And I told this story. Now, the story could not have had any implications for me whatsoever at 11 years old, except that I came from a family of storytellers. You see, I had young uncles and young aunts who lived next door. We lived next door to Grandma, you see. Lovely living next door to Grandma. Because if your mother wouldn't give you what you want, your grandma would, you see. And on this occasion, it was told in our house, and it must have been told very well, or everybody must have laughed, but it sunk into my mind. And when I told this story, I should imagine that no one could laugh except Mrs. Batty. Anyway, she was so delighted with it, she said to me, will you tell it to the other teachers? So the other teachers came in, and this was the story. There was this man, and he loved his wife very dearly. Unhappily, she died, and in love and gratitude to her, he had put over her grave a beautiful headstone with the beautiful words engraved upon it. The light of my life has gone out, but time healed his grief as time will, and he took himself another wife. Well, a charming lady, but of a somewhat jealous disposition, as if indeed she had every reason to be. But every so long he would take himself off to read the lovely words on the headstone. And so the lady decided to do something about it. She visited the local stonemason, and his next visit proved to be his last. For the words on the headstone now read, "The light of my life had gone out, but I have struck another match." Well, we go on again then, you know. As it says in the old book, faith can remove mountains. And that reminds me of a story that just fits. I call this the nun's story. And you see, there were these two little sisters of Mercy. They were out on the rounds of Mercy when the car, then a little Austin 7 it was called in those days, and it stopped right in the middle of a lonely country road, not far from the village, however. And so one of the sisters said to the other, "Now, sister," she said, "if you will remain here with the car, I will go into the village and see if I can get some petrol for us." So away she trots, gets to the village, gets to the garage, and she explains her dilemma. And the man from the garage said, "Well, sister, you could have some petrol." I said, "But I'm out to carry it in." She said, "We haven't any tins, all your tins is going back." Well, she said, "I'm afraid I haven't." Well, anyway, he says, "I'll see if Walter's out." So he's shouting at missus, and out she comes. He says, "Now then," he says, "I'm out, you can give me a lift at sister here. You know near the petrol up road, and there's no to carry it in." Well, his wife looked a bit cat-like, but she says, after a bit of hesitation, I says, well, she says, "if sister doesn't mind," she says, "from that bedroom." "Oh, no, indeed," said sister, "I don't mind." So they fills it up, and away she trots with it. Just as she's about to pour it into the tank, along comes the local vicar. "Well, sisters," he said, "whilst I am not of your religious persuasion, I greatly admire your faith. This is a true story from the Methodist Church in Thurstonland. And this again, both these stories are, as I've said once before, pure acts of faith. And they are true. You see, we got, the local preachers of the Bay of yesteryear, they were the actors. They were the people who showed you the pictures of the Bible. We as children learned the beauty of the Bible because these men showed it to us. Because it was their life, their real life. And they spoke from the heart. They didn't have to embellish it at all. And I think some of them felt lovely. As for instance, these two. And these were from Thurstonland over the years. And this chap were giving notices out after service, Now then, folks, he says, next Sunday morning, Mr. Senior will preach, God willing. In the afternoon, Mr. Burton will preach, God willing. In the evening, I shall preach Shares Air. Another one from Thurstonland. Many a time yourself, now you'd like to have certain words to a certain hymn tune, but they won't fit. They won't fit, so you don't bother. But if you're faith enough, faith can move mountains. And faith very nearly did. Because he announced it as follows. Don't preach, I said. Now then, folks, this is a short meter tune and long meter words. so you can pucker them in as best you can. Talking about those men, you know, a wonderful body of men. They'd walk 10 to 12 miles in snow to the knees, and there would never not be a service. I have known in my own experience of a service being held where there was the caretaker present and the visiting preacher. They were never daunted by any sort of weather, and it to tramp back. But they gave some lovely things to us, as for instance, in our own little hospital, the Home Valley Memorial Hospital. Well, many years ago, when we were building the hospital actually, we always have had, from the very beginning, a Friday evening service led by one of the local choirs, including the local, either the preacher, the minister, the vicar or whatever, was along there with the choir. And on this occasion, very early on in the life of the hospital, we didn't have everything ready. You see, we were changing the old military hospital, made of wood, hardboard, plaster, whatever you liked. We were changing all this into the hospital as it now stands. It was a project. And so, of course, on this occasion, we had many times a ward that couldn't be used because it was being built. And on this occasion, the whole of the hospital was in a fair state of chaos, except the maternity ward, which was completely finished. Absolutely beautiful. So outside people gathered, the men and women from the women's ward and visitors, just standing outside to listen to the service. Well, the service went on beautifully. And then when it came the preacher's turn to ask for God's blessing in the maternity ward, he asked for God's blessing on all the sick and suffering in this world, on all the sick and suffering in this hospital, especially for these unfortunate ladies who are here through no fault of their own. And I was telling this story to the late Reverend Arthur Dangerfield, and he said, well, you know, I remember one Friday night, he said, and I used to stand about the third bed up with my hand on the bed rail and listen to the singing, and then I would do my stint, he said, and this night I thought myself, I don't know, that the singing was more than usually beautiful, but I didn't attach any importance, and then I heard a little sound in the bed. So I turned, and there was one of my own parishioners, just coming to, as you might say. Well, he said he looked up, and he looked at me, he said, he looked a bit bewildered, but he went off as one would expect after an operation. So I said I thought no more about it, and then a few weeks later, as I was going down Victoria Street, he said, I met John coming up. Oh, he said, I'm pleased to see you, John. How are you doing, lad? He said, I'm doing right well, Vicar. He said, I'm champion. He said, but you know, when I was at the hospital, I had a right peculiar experience. Just as I was coming out at Clariform, he said, I had some beautiful music. I thought, I'm in heaven. But I looked up and I saw you and I thought, oh, now I'm it. Talking about refurbishing the maternity ward, he reminds me of another tale about do it yourself. Now, there was this here chap, you see, and he'd get an council house and buying him he was suited. He never thought he'd aspire to a council house. This is a bit since, of course. And so, of course, we're going to decorate it through and through. Well, the chap next door, he didn't know him lot, but somebody told him that he'd decorated his front room, so he knocked at the door and the chap came to the door. Now then, lad, he says, I wonder if that can help me. They told me I've decorated the front room, he says, and I want to do yours. He says, how many rolls of paper did they get? Oh, he said, I've ate 8. Thanks, lad. 2 or 3 days after he'd going past, short shirts. Has to finish the front room then? Ah, he says, I have. But he says, how many rolls of paper did they say I ate? He says, 8. He says, well, I did, he said, but that 4 left. I said, I don't know. Whilst on the subject of refurbishing, we're seeing something quite remarkable in our little villages, which used to consist of small derelict cottages, now no more. They are made into very desirable residences and a joy to the eye. And in this particular instance, this young couple, they'd made 2 derelict cottages into one delightful little dwelling. So they decided they must ask their auntie to come, because she'd helped them with a bit of encouragement and a bit out of the pocket So we decided to send for her. Well, she came, and she was enchanted. Never had she seen anything like it in her life. However, when she'd had her tea, she wanted to spend a penny. So her niece took her upstairs and showed her where to go. However, she was a very, very long time, and the niece got a bit alarmed. She said, I'd better go upstairs and see to my auntie. So upstairs she goes and knocks quietly on the door. Auntie, are you all right? I said, well, I think so, lass, but every time I try to pull myself up with this chain, I do pass a lot of water. I think of my young days, you know, when the dialect was spoken, it was spoken by elderly people and older people most of the time. But the funny thing about it, even so long since, you were not permitted to speak the dialect in the house at all. In fact, she just didn't, because she knew that didn't do. Neither would have suited your grandma, your mother. You did not speak the dialect in the house. But it was spoken, and I loved it as a child, and I still do. And when you think, I was thinking about the doctors, you see, years and years ago, when the young doctors used to come into the valleys, and they had had all these years to struggle and learn what they had to learn about the human body. And then they came, as I remember, 3 in my time, came one from Ireland, one from the south, and they came after all their hard learning to learn another language. And if they hadn't learnt the language, nobody would have got anywhere. And one particular thing I delight in, one particular story, and it's a true story, actually. It was told to me by one of the Blairmire families, the Blairmires of Huddersfield. One morning, the little maid wouldn't get up. No, nothing could induce her. So she sent for the doctor. So when the doctor came up into Alice's somewhat meagre little attic, doctor says to Alice lying stubbornly there, now Alice, he says, what's the matter with you? She says, nought. Well then he says, why don't you get up and do your work? She says, because they don't pay me. He says, move over, Alice, they don't pay me over. You know, there are stories probable and improbable. And you know very well that though the thing could not happen, it still makes you laugh. Now then, Jim had been there to work for many a month. And they hadn't had a knife and fork. Well, they hadn't had a knife and fork for weeks and weeks and weeks. And he was here fancying one. And as he'd been a right gut poacher in his youth without nothing, he'd go out and see if he'd get a bit of summit. Just summit for supper. So off he sets at morn. And to bit of luck, not a bit of luck and no so. But as he's coming home at night, just as he's going past Duck Pond, little ducks are swimming middle in that edge. So he looks around, nobody about. So he bends down, gets one out, wrings its neck, and starts to pluck it. Well, when he's getting it all plucked, sees Jack coming on at owns ducks. So he throws it back at water right sharp, and he just sits there. Now then he says, that's it again. I said, I can't keep the hands off now. And he said, don't give me that. He says, step there, comedy feathers. He says, well, he says, and I never listened to me. He says, there's an explanation for this, he says. Just as I was coming on here, that little duck swam up to me and he says, oh, which all my clothes will have a swim. I said, well, if they believe that, they'll believe all, wouldn't they? And this is another main possible one, but I like it. There was this little mouse, and he was running around and running around, and he fell into a barrel of ale. Well, he couldn't get out, he couldn't sleep up at sides at all, and, well, his hair, he thought, well, he was in a drain. But, just then, when he felt he was going to go down for the third time, he looked up and he saw Cat looking down. Oh, he says to Cat, me to get me out. Cat says, well, he says, I promise you one thing. If I get the out, can I eat there? I says, that can. Is that a sewer? He says, yes. He says, I can eat if they gets near. So Cat puts his paw down, lets little mouse out, drops him on the floor, and that deceitful little mouse, he just runs away. Cat says, well, that was a right mucky trick, my nose. I said, if I get there, I could eat there. He said, I bet the nose. They say, oh, when did he drink? Another one about, it was football match at Boxing Day, and it was between animals and insects. Well, you know, there's a bit of a discrepancy between animals and insects in that. And then at first off, it were, animals were 80 and insects nil. Well, they were very downhearted, but at any rate, he goes off and has lemon charm and comes back, and Mariner says, was that a famous friend there? We shall really, and folks, then be that come back with them and all. So by gum they started, and they knocked into that lot right, left and centre. And at the end of the afternoon, animals were still number 80, and insects were 120. Well, they were elevated, going off, congratulating one another. He said, by come on, with the wheel, and by come on, lad, he said, that centipede. That's the plastic ten. But we want it first off. Well, he said, I will lacing me boots up. George had done right well. And he'd getting his ten a Rolls Royce. Finally, getting on and getting his ten a Rolls Royce. So he thought, well, what he'd do, he'd go up to the village and show it Edgar. That was his pal when he was a lad. So just as he was driving into the village with Rolls Royce, Edgar's coming out with his Minnie. At any rate, they get out and shake hands and talk about old times a bit, and then it says, that says, I've done right well, Edgar, I'm getting my son a Rolls Royce. Edgar says, well, I'm getting my son a Minnie. But he says, I know, in my Rolls Royce I have a cocktail cabinet. Edgar says, well, I have a cocktail cabinet in my Minnie. He says, but the nose, I have a 12-inch colour television in my Rolls Royce. Edgar says, well, I have a 12-inch colour television in my Minnie. And what's more, I have a 4-poster bed in my Minnie. Well, he was that mad, he went straight down to Ritten Brothers, it's a bit sin, you know. And he said, now then, he says, can you put me a 4-poster bed in my Rolls Royce? Well, certainly, sir. Which they did. So he thought, well, he'd go up to the village and show it Edgar. So off he set. But there's a little lady out outside the village, and Edgar's car was parked outside. It was stained up. Couldn't see no through windows. He wondered whatever's going on. Either he just knocked up window. And after a bit, Edgar peeped out. He said, what do you want? He said, I've come to show thee my 4-poster bed I've put in my Rolls Royce. Nay, he says, surely they've never gotten me out at that to tell me that after. I think, as I said somewhere before, earlier on, that we have poets amongst us. They don't look like poets, but it's amazing when you find out what there is inside them. And this is a very, very old one. I can't remember how many years. I imagine the young woman who wrote it was only 11 years old and a pupil at the Holmfirth Primary School. And I've long tried to trace her. And she wrote this little poem when she was 11, imagine. It's almost 2 weeks that I noticed. I've never put them out at shop. I was eating some sparse when I felt it. A tooth that come loose up it top. Them sparse were hard, had to chomp 'em. I soon found out something were wrong. I thought for once that I'd suck 'em, but that way they lasted too long. I didn't say no to me mother. She found out me watching me eat. She said, I'd better take thee to the dentist, he'll know what to do with thee all right. But I told her she'd no need to bother. I could blinking well go with me sen. But she landed me sit she backhanded at me toit jumped out be it sen. We were talking of poets, weren't we? And how poets, we find them in unexpected places. Now, in the little town of Malton, some long while ago, there was a sprightly old lady of 83 years was telling this incident in the life of her mother. So that takes us a long time back. And she was telling the story to a young woman by the name of Dorothy Nettleton, a native of the little town of Malton. And she, being a poet, put it into the following words, which I think are enchanting. She says, now we were a great big family, but then they worry them days. And no one ever see a birth control and all of them fancy ways. There were 14 on us at Yarius. Some folk had even more. But just like many another, it were a never open door. Mother, she get fair weary, so thought tale were told of always having children. In fact, she get fair stole. One special request she made us, heartfelt as I'm sure you'll gather. Whatever you do, she said, when I die, don't bury me with your father. You know, they think as well we're a little bit dull, perhaps a little bit stupid up here. Well, we aren't. This is a description of a very severe winter in the Home Valley. And as we get the description of the weather in every one of Shakespeare's plays somewhere, they'll introduce the weather. I reckon this out Shakespeare. And it was set to me as far back as I think it was 1963. And we had a very big snow. And my friend Millie, she lived at Arden. She'd been walking to work 4 miles in the most terrible snow we'd had for many, many years. I was walking down to my work and Millie was coming up where she worked at the laundry. Now this morning it was snowing a bit. And we met and I said, Millie, isn't it awful? Well, she said this in reply to me. And it just came straight out and I just stood there absolutely gasping. I said, isn't it awful, Millie? Oh, she says, you should be up with us. It's going to be an Aunt Moon. Wires are hanging down and stuck together with ice, with no water, no electric, trees is on the knees, yard dogs walking on 3 legs and sheep as icicles are hanging on the tail. But I call that the indomitable courage of our hill dwellers. Up at Dales, you know, up at Yorkshire Dales, you often go into pubs and you don't just go to sup ale there. They go for a bit of good conversation. And they think all sorts of current affairs, things that's going on at world, and this night talk get round to Bible. And the way they discuss it a bit and then, they get into parables. Then they talked about the parable of the prodigal son. Well, they just realised that old John that was sitting there, he ran away from one when he were a lad. Ah, nothing, said John. They ran away from one when they were a lad, didn't they? Did they fabricate fatted calf when back, home back? No, we said, but they very near killed prodigal son. Now, the next one is one of my favourites. Well, it was civic dinner, you see. And, of course, there's a lot of different folk go to civic dinners. And on this occasion, there was new, young, local bank manager. And he gets set next to one of those farmers, local farmers, you see. Anyway, they talked about things and this and that, and then, well, young bank manager extolling banks, you see, and telling the old lad what a good thing it'd be to put his brass in a bank. And the lad, he says, I'm all right. I don't need no banks. I've looked after my brass and just all right for me. However, I said, well, he said, actually have to try to persuade you. Well, he said, don't think about it, lad, which of course he had no intentions. But at any rate, he changed his mind. And 2 or 3 days after, he arrived at bank with Mark and his wife and a great big bag of money. They could hardly lift it onto the counter. Ever they did. And then he says, I brought you this here money, he says, and I'm going to see what you can do with it. Mind you, he says, there's £50,000 in that bag, but I want it counting if it were 12 o'clock, and else I stack it back, 'cause me and Martha have to catch bus. Well, said, that's rather a tall order, sir, but nevertheless they went into the manager's office and counting started, and at 5 to 12 they came out. Well, sir, he said, we have counted the money, but I'm very sorry to have to tell you that in that bag there was only £49,000. Nay, Martha, he says, that's the wrong bag. You know, there's always some folk that knows better than anybody else, and they know it before they lent it. They do. Well, this here chap did that. He hadn't been at his licence for a fortnight when he called in at Gaddy's, and he says to Gaddy's chap, he says, well, he says, I know just as I pay a lot to take off to Italy for the holidays this year. He says, he even won't do that, the nose. They'd rather drop at the opposite side at ruin. Why, should that be all right? But by gum, he saw me there to a task. He said, by God, old hand, he said, but now I right the nose. I've been practising on Barnsley Road, and by gum, it is dangerous. You know, we give him to lark in brass bands in this valley. Well, in a lot of valleys I know, but we give him to being great followers of your brass bands. But just occasionally, there's somebody that doesn't like a brass band. And that's something that I don't understand, but it does happen. And this young woman, called her to sisters, they said at 8 afternoon and said, come for a tea. Well, he says, you can stay your tea, Molly, but we're going to Rank concert tonight so you can please your son. Where are you going to stop? Well, I said, I might as well go here to Rank concert to go on with my son. So off they go to Rank concert. And it just sits there, just as if there were not going on, and everybody was clapping and clapping. And then trombone played that solo, Stratch polka, I think it is, and by gum, they nearly fetched the roof in, and when everybody had finished clapping, she was still going on. Well, I says to her rent manager, I said, what's the look with that? Freddie gave up, folk, I think they're hanging there. What says, that doesn't like brass bands now, says, but anybody that can get all that there in this house of John Gutclap. Grandma had been to the wedding, to her granddaughter's wedding, and it was beautiful. A vastly different wedding to her own. The flower-like bride and the fairy-like bridesmaids were enchanting. She was absolutely didn't do it, as we say in Yorkshire. However, at reception, wedding cake and all things, Grandma, well, she'd never seen naught like it. And then at the end of the meal, when the waiter came and said to her, now, madam, he said, what would you like with the toast, port or sherry? Well, I said, I'm no one used to drinking very much, lad, but I'll just have a drop of port. But I don't want any toast. It gets under my teeth. You know, sometimes just as you're going to say something important, it suddenly just goes, leaves you. You cannot think. And it can be very embarrassing, especially if it is that you're going to introduce one person to another and you forget one of the names. Well, it would be better really if you forget them both, wouldn't it? But at any rate, I think this vicar, this unfortunate thing happened to her, that must have been the very limit. Because you were marrying this young couple, you see, and you were particularly well acquainted with them. He didn't have need to think about what they called them. They were his own parishioners, and everything was going smoothly until he came to say, wilt thou, John, take Mary? Well, for the life of him, he couldn't remember the young man's name, but being a man of some initiative, and imagining the young man was also, he leaned forward, and in a very earnest voice he said, in what name did thou come to this church to be married to Mary? The young man instantly replied, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And that reminds me of another story. George and I, walking in the Yorkshire Dales, were absolutely drenched on this Sunday evening, and no room at the inn. So we were standing there under the lit gate of the church, when a lady came hurrying by with a roll bundle under her arm, and so I stepped out and I said, excuse me, but could you tell us where we could get somewhere for the night? She said, well, have you been to the inn? So I said, well, we have, but there's no room at the inn. So she said, well, my husband's preaching at the chapel, and I'm playing the organ. So if you will stay there, because we weren't fit to go and sit down anywhere, you can, I'm sure it will be perfectly all right for you to come and stay with us. But I said, that's an imposition, and I didn't intend. Never mind, she said, you wait here. Well, she wasn't so long, I'll tell you, I bet she'd gone through them volunteers at a rare pace. They came back and took us into their home, gave us a hot bath and a lovely supper, and then Mr. Oakfield told us some delightful stories, about the old days and the days. Well, this one I thought was delightful. He said it was true, of course, and it happened in the chapel at Dent. Unhappily, there came a hole right in the middle of the chapel roof. Well, it was the days, before there was coffee mornings, coffee evenings and the like. And so, of course, getting the money in very slowly. Indeed, it was coming in slowly. So they decided to have a bit of a spiritual get-together on the Wednesday evening. So there they were, assembling the body of the chapel itself, coming in at pennies and tuppences, threepence, now and again a sixpence, and a rarer shilling, and a much rarer half-crown. And everybody was waiting for the senior deacon. He was sitting right in the middle of the chapel, when suddenly a piece of plaster fell on his head. He leapt to his feet, he shouted, £100! And old Josiah sitting in the front pew. He leapt to his feet and he shouted, Hallelujah, hallelujah, smite it again, Lord, smite it again. Well, you know, folks, just at this present time in society, we're having a lot of trouble, what with vandalism and rebellions and one thing and another. But we have to think that it's natural in youth in a way, because we've all been young and we'll all did things that youth does. But I do think sometimes some of the things that's going on, I think it's a little bit of rough justice wouldn't come amiss. And I will agree with me, because to this here long distance lorry driver, he's just getting into this here transport cafe, getting his meal just in front on him, his steak and chips and peas, his apple tart and custard, and his coffee. Just about to start, when the door opened and 3 rate jobs came in. Leather breeches, leather coats, medals all over them, goggles and helmets. Swaggers over to it. Chaps sitting. One of them knocked his steak and chips and peas at the floor. So they knocked his apple tart and custard at the floor. And so they sucked his coffee. Well, he never said a word. He got up, quietly went to the counter, paid his dues, and went out. Well, one of them swaggered up to the waitress. She said, well, right done. He isn't much of a man, is he? No, she said, looking out at the window. And he isn't much of a driver, no, that he's just one of the 3 motorbikes. Well, little Johnny, he lived at home with his father and mother, and several brothers and sisters. So they hadn't a lot of time for the refinements of the table, just to say they had plenty of good food on the plates. However, one day he was invited to tea to his aunties. Well, they hadn't any children there, so they could have the lot, you know, fish, knives, cake, forks, serviettes, side plates. However, his auntie noticed he wasn't using his side plate. Oh, dear love, she said, don't you have plates at your house? He said, I but not with no tongue. Up here in North, we know the value of money, and out that we buy has to last, especially clothes. Bill, he just had his new suit, he was 16, just had his first suit. And that fella said, I want you to look after this, you know. I have a good name in this here town, and I want you to look after this here suit, he says. I want you to keep your coat hanger in shoulders. So I shall do that. But a week or two after, he saw him come in there, and he says, now then, he says, are you going on with your suit, he says? Are you keeping your coat hanger in your shoulders? He says, well, I tried it for the better week, he said, but it kept knocking me hat off. And that reminds me of another story. John had just getting a new suit, and he was right set up with it, you see. They were just going to chapel one morning, Sunday morning it was actually, and, well, his pal was going in at the same time, so naturally said, see there, I just had a new suit, he said, just to like it. He said, had it made to measure? Well, he said, it's all right. It'd have been better if I'd had it made to fit. You know, we often talk about Yorkshire folk being thrifty. Well, thrift's all right as far as it goes. But I think sometimes you can go too far with thrift. Because old Sam were on his deathbed. Well, he seemed to be enjoying it, he'd been there long enough. But at any rate, that night, Mrs. had to go out to the village. So she says, well, I'm going down to the village now, I shan't be so long, you'll be all right. Well, he says, Lassie says, can I have a couple of candles? Can I have a couple of candles, lad? Well, no, says, I can't. I can have one, but if I feel the sun going, I'm going to blow it out. And then, you see, this is a true story, this next one. There was Sam. Now, Sam, he was thrifty. They called him Thrifty Sam, so you know. And in the village, well, he hadn't gotten wed because nobody had had in. But he had a trout, every young woman that came into the village, and a new lass that come. So he asked her, took her out. Well, when she get back at night, she was blazing mad. She says, Mother, I wish I'd never have gone with him. He only spent 9pence on me every bit of the day. I says, well, lass, I'll give it him back. Well, he was chucking down with rain. But she says, I will. So she went out and went down to Sam's, knocked at the door. When he came to the door, she said, I've brought you your 9pence back. Nay, lass, he says, I needn't have bothered to eat. It had have done at morn. Believe me, I think that honesty is the best policy. And when you've heard this tale, you'll agree. Harry and Bill were in Huddersfield and they hadn't a penny between them. They were walking on New Street and Harry saw a shilling it gutter. Well, of course, they were elevated. Picked it up, went into Woolworths and ordered a cup of tea. Well, when waiters bought it, stuck under one of the saucers were a 10-shilling note. Well, they knew what they should have done, but they sucked the chap and headed out. Went across to the pub. When waiters brought them their ale, she brought them change for a £1 note. Well, they were a bit nonplussed, as you might say, a bit undecided, and Harry says, don't you think we ought to tell her? Then as we found that shilling and then we get that 10-shilling note. Well, I think it's ratching it while it robs. I say, Miss, she said, it's all right, love, I'm bringing you change in a minute. I'm thinking about that national pastime, you know, bingo. Oh, well, we have it up here and all. And I'll tell you a tale about that. It was a right nice morning, and John and Bill were set at the bottom of the street, set on to see it yonder talking, and John said to Bill, he says, hey, would you like to come with me to bingo tonight? Oh, by gum, he says, I'm no good to going to bingo. He says, I don't know how to go on. Well, she said, don't come, I'll show thee, I'll keep my eye on thee. All right, he says, after a bit of persuasion, he says, I'll come. So he goes, and they hadn't been in, well, job hasn't been going on so long. When John's never been a fool, he says to Bill, now he says, that's never put 11. Well, he was a bit needle, but he put it like. 2 minutes after, says, knocked him again, he says, that's never put 3. Well, he was a bit needle, so he says, now then he says, thee man the own business, he said, and fill the own card up. He said, I can't, it's full. Well, that's about it. That's the way we were. Happen as we still are. I hope you've enjoyed the tape. I certainly enjoyed making it. The best part of all is that all the money is going to the Cancer Relief Macmillan Fund. There's an old Yorkshire saying, hear all, see all, say out. Eat all, sup all, pay out. And if ever that does out for note, do it for the sen. That certainly doesn't apply because of the great generosity of the Yorkshire people towards the National Society for Cancer Relief Macmillan Fund.